some of these scriptures that he passed off to me. Philippians 2, Luke 15, and Acts 25. Yeah, I've read them a bunch of times in the last few days, and just very briefly, in case you haven't read them yourself, Acts 25 is kind of in the middle of Paul's imprisonment in where is he? In Caesarea, I think. But there's Acts 23 to 26 is a whole story about Paul just being stuck in prison, and he uses his time to sort of to witness to his captors, actually. And then Philippians 2 is a really famous passage about the humility of Jesus. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who did not think equality of God something to be grasped, but instead emptied himself and humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death. And then there's this recommendation in Philippians 2 for us to be like Christ, in that we're following after Jesus's humility. And then Luke 15 is a very famous passage about the prodigal son. Well, it's actually about it's three parables: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then obviously the prodigal, the lost son. With really, anyway. Yeah, I was reading these, and today I was really struck by, I saw kind of a theme woven through all three of these, in that, Paul is this really beautiful example of the selflessness of Jesus, actually, that you see in Philippians 2. And that here's a guy who's on his way to Rome, and he's trying to do the Lord's will, and he's gotten in so much trouble for following the Lord. His life's been put in danger, all these different things. And we see him, especially, actually, I read ahead in chapter 26, and you see Paul witnessing to, I believe it's Felix. There's Felix and Festus. He talks to both of them. These kings, who are not Christians, and he's telling them the gospel. And he says in chapter 26, he says, it's my desire that all men would be like me, except for, of course, the chains that I'm in. And it's just this beautiful picture of somebody in a really not great circumstance, but instead of being selfish, instead of thinking about himself, or maybe, he had a lot of reasons to think about how miserable his circumstances were. And yet here he is witnessing to people and trying to share the gospel and trying to share the truth. And he's still, which is a form of love, it's a form of serving. And it's an amazing form of humility for Paul to, I was just really struck by that. And that, Philippians 2 is laying out this, this selflessness of Jesus, that yeah, he could have had all this privilege, but he chose not to, and he chose to serve instead. And there's a line in there about, so let everyone not only think about their own interests, but think about the interests of others. And that guy was really, really struck by that, because for me, it's just a really great application in this season of my life. I'm as many of you know, I'm a missionary in Italy, and I'm short-term right now, and I'm just going on tourist visas because I was denied a religious work visa for not great reasons. Anyway, it's a big story. I'm trying to sort that out, but I'm just find myself in this waiting period. And I think in the past couple of months, it's been irritating and annoying, and I've gotten impatient with myself and with the Lord and with circumstance. And yet there's this really great reminder in these passages of look at the example of Jesus, look at his selflessness, look at his humility. And it was just this light bulb went off for me today of just maybe stop thinking about yourself so much and your circumstances and the things you don't have. Look at my servant Paul, look at Jesus, and then look at Paul following Jesus, and that he's witnessing to people, he's loving people, he's serving in the place where he is, even though it's deeply uncomfortable, and not probably what he would have wanted to see happen in his life, And yeah, I just found that challenging. And there was even a thread of it in the Luke 15, in this idea that heaven is rejoicing when the lost sheep is found, and when a sinner repents, and when the lost coin is found. And he again relates it back to a sinner repenting. And then we see this at the end of the story of the prodigal son, there's this miserable, the older son, who can't rejoice because he's too wrapped up in his own world of following his father's rules. And obviously there's a whole thing you can unpack there, but I don't know, I just saw this theme all the way through it of just like, one thing the Lord's been speaking to me about, or he was speaking to me about, this summer, and even when I was in Italy, was I was listening to a lot of the Bible Project. I really like those guys, but they were talking about that word righteousness, and how that, like, the way that Jesus and a lot of the New Testament authors use the word righteousness really has a lot to do with like right relationships with other people, right, like loving relationships with other people. And I have this tendency, and I think Canadians have this tendency too. It's really we have this very like our solitude today. We have a very solitary culture, and we tend to like take our religion that way too. That like we're okay, I'm going to follow Jesus and serve Jesus, and we have our plans in our life and whatever. And really, what God is calling us into is relationships, right relationships with other people, loving relationships with other people. And that's what Jesus, when he came, he served, and he helped, and he was selfless. And anyway, great example of that in Paul's life, and it was a challenge for me. And I even found, actually, on meditating that today, I found, I had a really long conversation with a friend, kind of going through some stuff. And yeah, we were able to talk and pray. And it was just like a reminder of like, you can still serve. There's still things that you can do. You don't have to spend all of your time focused on yourself. Anyway, so it was a great reminder for me. Hope it's a good reminder for you guys too. See ya.